Good day. Thank you for joining us at the Engerati studio. We're located at the CTICC for the African Utility Week 2014. And today we have with us Greg Kaser. He is the Senior Project Manager of the World Nuclear Association. Thank you so much for taking time out. Before the conference starts, you're actually our first speaker, so thank you for joining us.
Great to be here, yeah.
Good, thank you very much for joining us. You had a focus day yesterday. Let's delve straight into it. And you were discussing the fact that there's actually very little nuclear power in Africa. Could you discuss that with us, or just expand on that for us and what was discussed at the focus day yesterday?
Yeah, well, we came to African Utility Week on the focus day on nuclear because although there's an awful lot of potential in Africa and a good reasons to have nuclear power, at the moment it's really only South Africa where there is a power plant.
One.
Question is why, perhaps, but obviously one of the main reasons there is that Africa's got enormous hydro resources.
Right.
So, a country will probably go for the hydro first before going on to nuclear, which is a bit more complicated. You need a greater regulatory infrastructure. You need a lot of technical expertise to get into a nuclear program, and that needs to be built up over time. But we asked a question there at the focus group of the 20 or so people who were there. How much nuclear might there be? By 2050, would there be 3 countries at least in Africa with nuclear? And I must say the result was very mixed.
Sure. Okay.
Pretty much half and half thought could be, another half sort of said maybe not even 3. Yeah.
Why?
So, well,
other than the fact that you say perhaps it takes longer than to develop a hydroelectric power station. What are the other obstacles? Is it perhaps regulation from a government perspective? Does it take too long to do things on the continent? There is that general perception that things are perhaps a little bit trickier.
The perception is certainly that nuclear power is more expensive and doesn't fit well with a continent where there's an awful lot of people who can hardly afford electricity anyway.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the main perception. But nuclear power is not as expensive as all that. If you're comparing it with some renewable sources of energy, it's actually cheaper. It's on the level of coal, which is already, exploited quite extensively.
Yeah.
But in terms of price, you're coming up to something a bit like a coal-fired plant as well.
Right.
Similar to that level. But,
Okay.
Why not? It's because it's a big overall upfront cost,
Right.
and that's tricky to get over. You've got to persuade investors to come in. You've got to have the right regulatory framework in place.
Okay.
So there are quite a few barriers there.
Now, in comparison to hydroelectricity, surely there are some, regulatory issues there too. And added to which, majority of the continent, not majority of the whole continent, but there are certain areas where they've experienced extreme drought, and hydroelectricity is not helping them at all. And they're having to draw on other forms of sources. So surely they should be looking at nuclear, in a long-term perspective.
Nuclear is much more flexible in that respect.
Yes.
Because clearly you do need very often a good source of water for the cooling
Yes.
of the plant. But that's actually not a real obstacle, in fact, because Jordan, for example, is planning to have a nuclear power plant, and it's a pretty dry and arid area there.
Right.
But what they're going to use is wastewater from the cities.
Ah, okay.
And that's already used in the United States and Arizona. There's a plant there that
Right.
uses entirely wastewater. So if you can have a secure link to the an urban area's wastewater,
Yes.
you can actually put a nuclear power plant there as well. You don't even need a lake or need the sea.
Oh, right.
But of course that helps.
Okay. And then the other question that I have is, you know, Africa is pretty sparsely populated. You know, as far as nuclear stations is concerned, they're generally close to, you know, large, you know, sort of metropolitan areas. How will the Nuclear World Association, or how do they intend on improving that? I mean, is it possible to build almost smaller nuclear stations closer to these sparsely populated areas?
Certainly. One of the developments currently underway is to have small modular reactors.
Right.
Now these are essentially, you know, 1/10 the size of your typical large plant that is being built now. Now, utilities who are going for a nuclear power plant, there are economies of scale to have a very large plant.
Yeah.
And you know, it keeps the cost down. And you're going to need the same number of people to run a big plant as you need to run a small plant. And you know, so there are some economies there that you can gain from a large scale. The difficulty is, can you use the electricity it generates?
Right.
And that, I think, is probably where a lot of African countries are now.
Yes.
Because their grids, you know, just couldn't take up the electricity.
Right.
But over time, we're going to see the development and growth, not only of the population, but of the population's prosperity.
Yep.
We certainly hope that anyway.
Yes, well, it does seem to be going that way currently.
Yeah, so if you've got a critical mass of people, you know, on middle incomes, you know, you're now in the game where you're going to need a lot of electricity. And it's a step change, because you go from running a barrow on you know, in the marketplace to a supermarket.
That's it.
You know, a supermarket needs a lot of power there. You know, keep the frozen
going.
vegetables, the lighting,
absolutely,
and everything. You know, 24 hours a day. You know, power, and that's what nuclear can provide.
Okay. So, I mean, if utilities had to come to you and say, why should we choose nuclear over solar panel farm? You know, we've been approached by you know, XYZ investors from overseas. They're wanting to put in a solar farm, but you want to bring in nuclear. What would be your first point of
at the moment, the costs certainly favour nuclear rather than solar. It is argued that the costs of solar power may well reduce over time. That would be what we might expect as the technology matures.
Yes.
So we could find it going, you know, becoming a bit more competitive.
Yes.
I think the real advantage of renewables is that, you know, they are free energy. You just need the equipment there to capture it.
You need to
capture
maintain
the
it
sun
as well.
or capture the wind power. But
yes.
They can be intermittent.
Right.
And so if you have an unreliable source of energy, you've got to have backup to that. Now, nuclear is not necessarily a good backup. It can ramp up and down.
Okay.
But you're probably better off with gas there.
Right.
So I think
important
over the
to
long
have a good energy mix, basically.
Indeed.
You know, have a bit of renewable. Nuclear definitely can provide a very long-term, sustainable energy option.
Absolutely. We see, you know, nuclear power and hydropower as being very good low-carbon base load energy providers.
Right.
If you have a minority of intermittent renewable sources as well, you're going to help capture that free energy out there, which is obviously going to be a good thing.
Yep.
But as the proportion of renewables on the system increases, it starts to push out the baseload power, and baseload being the 24/7 requirement of a population.
What is the benefit for the consumer? You know, for a nuclear power station to come into the area, will it bring tariffs down? Will it increase tariffs? Would it perhaps be a short-term increase, or how will it benefit the consumer?
Well, it will depend a bit on the capital costs. The fuel costs and operating costs, which you need sort of all the time to manage the plant. Those are a relatively small proportion of the overall cost of a nuclear power plant. You have to pay off quite a lot of capital cost from your sale of electricity, and that can be over a 20 or more year period of repaying that capital charge. So there's quite a lot of variation around the world on those capital costs. In Asia, where they're building large-scale programs, such as in South Korea or China, they're getting those capital costs really low. About half.
So there are business models that they can actually look to and almost try and copy. Is it possible for the African continent to do that?
I don't see why not.
Okay.
The challenge is to have enough nuclear power plants to make it worthwhile to get the economies of scale on the manufacturing side.
Right, yes, bring the costs down.
And that's perhaps where the small modular reactors come in, because they are built in a factory, put on a train and shipped to the site, essentially. They're small enough to do that, or that's the hope anyway in the design that is currently underway in the United States in particular. But small modular reactors are also under construction in China and in Russia as well. So it's not just there. But the idea there is perhaps you build up a series of small reactors instead of having one large plant. And that means perhaps it's a bit more flexible as your demand goes up in the locality, in your urban area. As growth proceeds, you put in one to start off with, you put in another as, a few years later, and another few years after that.
Africa, there seems to be a trend in Europe. Everyone's trying to go off-grid, and they're creating communities, little energy communities. This is probably already happening in Africa. I've just been speaking to Andrew Jones. He talks a lot about energy storage and how this will enhance. Do you see this happening in Africa at all? Do you see a place for nuclear in this trend towards distributed generation and a microgrid? Where do you see this moving?
No, I don't think nuclear fits into that picture, really.
Right.
If you've got an industrial, urbanized society, it makes sense to have a nuclear element in your system. If you're trying to supply sort of very dispersed populations, low density populations who are largely engaged in sort of agriculture or tourism, those sort of things, you can get away with other forms of power generation.
Okay, fair enough. Yes. All right. Okay. What is your association hoping to gain from the conference? It hasn't really started yet. It's only just started now. But what are you hoping to gain from it?
Well, we want to put over the message about the benefits you can get from nuclear power. If you look objectively at the issues that concern people, and there's an awful lot of material on our website at www.world-nuclear.org. You can find a lot of information on those issues like, health effects of radiation, how to dispose of nuclear materials that are now waste products or used fuel, proliferation issues, all those issues that come up in every conversation about nuclear power. Awful lot of information about that, and independent academic investigations and analysis have shown nuclear to be not only less harmful for every kilowatt hour generated than many other sources of power, but also quite affordable as a means of generating electricity.
All right. So there really does seem to be quite a few opportunities and benefits for both the utility and the consumer in Africa. So I'm sure you won't have too much of a tough time putting your argument across to them. It's obviously just upfront capital. But I wish you all the best for the conference. I hope you thoroughly enjoy it. Thank you very much for joining us at the studio. Please note that we'll be doing numerous videos related to the conference, so please feel free to look over them once they are published after the conference.